Raj actually was a marketing professor, well, still is, and was looking at these organizations that didn't seem to spend all that much on marketing and yet had fiercely loyal customers and were doing well and continuing to grow. And Wegmans was on there. Companies like Southwest Airlines, Patagonia, these companies that just have a really loyal following despite not spending all this money on marketing. And so he was looking at, like, what do these companies have in common? What is this all about? And what he keyed in on were four tenets of what came to be known as conscious capitalism. So the first being that they have a higher purpose beyond just making profits. You need profits to survive. You want to keep the lights on, but the purpose of the company can and maybe even should go beyond that.
Welcome to Rochester Business Connections, powered by Balbert Marketing, LLC, where I get the chance to chat with Rochester, New York's very best business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. I am your host, Ben Albert. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, we don't do advertisements. My fee for this show is simple. If you gain value from the episode, personally share with a friend and explain your favorite part. Let's get started. I am here with Andrew Brady. Andrew, what's up, man? It's fun shooting the shit before we started, and I'm excited to have you here today, man.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation, Ben.
So you're the CEO of XLRA. You told me beforehand it's Accelerate, XLRA.
You got it.
You're a TEDx speaker. You're host of the Evolution of Business podcast, founder of the Rochester chapter of Conscious Capitalism. And wow, as I start reading just these bite-sized pieces that only are a fraction of the explanation of who you are, I'm like, wow, I'm going to do like 5 hours with this guy. But we'll keep it under an hour. And I'm wondering, where should we start? Tell me a little bit about your business, XLRA. Do you pronounce it that way, or do you call it Accelerate?
I just say Accelerate. People struggle with it a little, and then you say it 3 times fast, and then they'll usually get that it's Accelerate. But yeah, we're a leadership development company. One of the things, if you want to hire a company a consulting company that you want them to help you get where you're trying to go faster. So we try to accelerate that process or accelerate that evolution, if you will. And really what we do is to work with organizations to help create a kind of culture at the organization that can be a competitive advantage. So many companies these days, they know to say, well, our people are our most important asset, or they, put the fancy page on their website of their mission and their purpose and their values and things. But how do you actually take it off of just that website or off of that plaque on the conference room wall and actually bring it inside the organization, both in the way that you're hiring and promoting people, the ways that you're developing future leaders and maybe evolving the current leaders as well. And, all these different elements, because more and more people want to work for the kinds of companies where they can really have a positive impact. They feel energized rather than drained by going to work. And, maybe even they have a purpose that's, feels really important and meaningful to them. And, that can really set organizations apart in terms of their longer term success. So that's what we do at Accelerate. And it's a fun time. It's really interesting to find those kinds of companies that are really willing to go, like I joke, beyond just, okay, let's put our purpose on our website. And they say, no, we really want to make this happen.
Absolutely. I love to hear that. I mean, my girlfriend's an example. She works for Transcat. They're a Rochester-based company. And she's like, recruiters are reaching out to me all the time. I could get paid more, but I love working here. And there's power in having that with your workforce. So how do I accelerate? It's a 2-part question. How do I accelerate myself? And or if I'm a team leader, or I own a company, or I'm managing a team, or anything like that, how do I accelerate the culture of the company more than just putting a mission statement plaque on the wall?
Yeah, I love the fact that was a 2-part question, because I think too often I hear from a business leader, and they're like, oh yeah, can you work with my team, or can you do these sorts of things? And sometimes the trickiest part of my job, especially like in a sales process, is to get that leader to look at themselves and say, how do I need to grow and evolve so that I can, both support but also drive the evolution of this company and the company culture. And it really does begin with an internal, somewhat reflective type of a process to say, not only, what is the mission of the company and what are the values of the company, but what is my personal mission and my personal values, and how do I start to operationalize those more and try to bring that more into my life? Because those are the sorts of things that people, before they decide that they want to follow you, they want to know who you are and what you stand for. And if you have all these great things that your company tries to stand for, but the first time, I think one of the kind of easy examples to give is, companies talk about how they will embrace failure and those sorts of things. And then at the same time, if the first time you admit to your boss that, oh yeah, I screwed this up, but it was a learning experience and those sorts of things, and here's what we're going to do differently next time, here's how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again, and your boss doesn't have kind of the emotional intelligence or emotional control to actually believe in that, and they treat you in a way that shows, oh yeah, well, we say we embrace failure, but not this time, or not because of this. And so the leader really needs to be an authentic leader that embodies the mission of the organization. So that's usually where we start, is with the business owner, business leaders. Sometimes the whole senior team all at once is really getting them clear on their own, what we call your inner compass. Getting clear on your own purpose, your own values, your own strengths, so that you can start to lead from that way. And then working as well on what is the compass, so to speak, for the organization. And part of what that looks like in practice is, first, okay, if we say, we care about values, and here's some of the values, whether it's, integrity, or, all these things that sound great, but it's like, well, what does that look like? And one of the easiest ways to get started, and it sounds kind of silly, but it's all about storytelling. From the time that we are young kids, we learn about right and wrong and what's expected of us by stories and fairy tales, right? And you hear about, who gets celebrated and who maybe the villains are based on these stories that you hear. And similarly, inside of an organization, it doesn't matter what the dictionary says integrity means, or any of the, or authenticity, or whatever. What matters is, tell me a story about when we've lived integrity, to a full out extent, just gone above and beyond. And the more that you start to tell those stories inside your organization, it becomes like a mythology. It becomes a lore of people have all these stories of us at our best. And from those stories, not only do employees and leaders and everyone get an idea of kind of what's expected for integrity, or for teamwork, or whatever the case may be. But then also from those stories, you can start to pick out, how do we go towards creating behaviors? What are the behaviors that it looks like in practice when we're living this out? And so, yeah, it's really about storytelling, and it's about creating those behaviors, and recognizing too the interplay of purpose-driven leaders alongside a purpose-driven company.
I love this. I mean, I'm feeling like you sometimes have to slow down to speed up. You want to tell the story. You want to relate to people, have them understand your why. And I know personally, I can't stop reading. I can't stop listening to podcasts. And if you were to have me take a test, I could probably crush it in business, personal development, just knowledge, right? But it's the stories and learning about challenges and pitfalls and the stuff that you don't find on the wall in that mission statement, where I actually learn the most and actually can connect. And I don't know your story I don't think I actually know it at all. We've only spoken once, and the listeners might not know it yet either. So to kind of challenge you, and I think you'd be open-minded to this, I'm curious with, Accelerate, what is that mission statement? Beyond that, does your mission statement align with that? And where did all this information come from? Did you just roll out of bed and say, I have a mission statement today? Or did things lead you up to that moment that you figured out your why and you figured out the why of your company? Do you have a story behind that?
Yeah. So my story, in some ways, I feel very lucky, because I had some clarity around what I wanted to do and my purpose from a fairly early age, because actually I didn't start the Accelerate team. It's actually a company that my father started when I was pretty young. And the beginning of that story for me and why I started to get interested in this was actually my dad. He had a 25-year career, worked in a hospital system. It was part of Park Ridge Hospital, which then got rolled into Unity and is now part of Rochester Regional. And he was started as a social worker, had a 25-year career, worked his way up into kind of executive leadership roles, and walked into a performance review one day. And his boss, who was the president of the hospital system at the time, said, "Tom, I can tell you've lost a little bit of your passion. What's going on? Everything okay?" And my dad said, "You know what? I just don't want to work here anymore." And he up and left. And so I always joke, because at the time I was 7 years old, but I also had two older sisters that they were in high school, so college bills looming and all these sorts of things. And so I always joke, I have no idea how he explained himself to my mom. This somewhat reckless decision that he made. But the way that he described it to me in 7-year-old terms, kind of translated, was there are certain things I liked about my job and certain things that I didn't. And I want to do more of the things that I liked. So to a 7-year-old, you're like, all right, way to go, Dad. That makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. So it really colored my worldview from a pretty early age. Not only, that so many parents tell you to follow your dreams and those sorts of things, but here was a guy that was doing it and taking a pretty big risk to do it as well. But also that work should be a source of meaning and fulfillment and even fun. And it turned out that those things that he liked to do about his job that he wanted to do more of was throughout his career, as he was kind of climbing the ladder, he always loved building his own team and, developing the people on his team. And so that's what he started doing, full time basically. And really, really kind of just the dinner table conversation as I grew up was always around this personal development and organizational development. And so I had a really early kind of exposure to that, where I was like, I think this is something that I want to do too. And my dad was always very careful, almost to a fault, like never wanted to push me into it or anything. But it was really a seeking process on my end. And it sounds like for you as well, just that personal development and loving to learn and read and just always absorbing new information. And so that was a part of how I discovered that, my own purpose was around both seeking that wisdom, but then helping to share it and teach it and helping both individuals and organizations to align their great intentions and their own purpose with their actual behaviors.
I love this. And I'm wondering, so at your team, how do you help me understand my leadership style or what culture I should be building? Do you have certain courses or exams or again, another two-part question, because the listeners are all across the board, from members of a corporate organization to small-time entrepreneurs. So I'm a one-man show. I guess I'm asking is coming to you for consulting, do you work with one-man shows? And then part two is with larger organizations, how do you help them figure out their story and their culture and how to ultimately influence the satisfaction of their employees?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've struggled with this. Actually, when I finally went after college, I wanted to get some outside experience. Actually, one of our longtime clients has been Wegmans Food Markets. And so my dad started working with them in 2001, and what they call Wegmans Leadership University is a basically 15-month program. Starts with a retreat week where we do some of these really introspective types of things that I was talking about with, developing your own inner compass. And then you also, along that way, you get some 360 feedback. So if you have a boss, what does your boss think? What are some of your peers think? What are some of the people on your team that report to you? What do they think about your leadership style? So it's kind of like this comparison, right? Of here's my inner compass and what I care about and what I'm hoping to leave the world with, when people interact with me. And then here's some of the the good and the bad of what people are seeing in their everyday experiences with me as a leader. And then the process after that, because I think one of the challenges with especially people who are really interested and engaged with personal development, and I'm certainly guilty of this sometimes too, is you finish reading the book and you're like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. And then you've got this huge stack and you go pick up the next one before you actually apply anything or change anything, or, bring some of these insights into practice. And so it's, similarly, sometimes we could go away at a retreat or whatever the case may be, and we're leaving that retreat and we have all the best of intentions, or, even if you've never done a retreat, you've probably had your New Year's resolutions or whatever things along those lines. And then maybe hang on to them for a couple of days. If you were at a retreat and now you've got an email inbox that's piled up, and by halfway through the next day, probably all those great intentions that you thought you were going to start to implement go out the window. And so that's actually where we do a lot of our most important work, in my view, is really where the rubber meets the road. Is okay, after the retreat, doing that ongoing coaching, really focused on behavior change, really focused on habit change, and what it actually takes to go from those good intentions to actually putting it into practice and making it a habit. And so that's kind of a big picture vision. But one of the things that I ended up doing was after college, I went and actually worked for Wegmans for a couple of years because I wanted to get some outside experience outside the company. I moved out to the Boston area, helped them open up a bunch of stores out there. And for a company who, they've been one of the best companies to work for a number of years, and they're always on that list, right? So culture is part of their secret sauce, and as is the case with many of our clients at Accelerate. But for them, they were starting in a brand new market where, the customers didn't know what to expect. The employees didn't really know what was expected of them, that kind of Wegmans customer service and that sort of a thing. And so that was part of my job, was going out there as a small cohort of people who knew Wegmans and how do we train up the new employees and recreate this culture from scratch. And so I was able to do that with them for a couple of years before coming back to Accelerate and joining full time. But that's one of the things when I did come back and working with Accelerate and working with my dad and say, marketing 101, right? Like what is our target market? And it was a challenge because we work with Wegmans, who's, 50, 60,000 maybe people, and they're in retail. I work with small companies that are maybe a handful of people, 4 or 5, architecture firms, engineering firms, all across the board. And what I eventually realized was it wasn't so much a demographic target market, but more psychographic, right? It was more about the leaders who not only said our people are our most important asset, or not only, said, yeah, we need to put the values on the plaque on the wall, but they said, no, we really believe in this and we really want to make culture, what sets us apart. And so that was a big piece of it. Now, one of the other challenges that happened was I don't have, at least at this point, any solo entrepreneurs as clients. But one of the things that we did was based on our experience with both with Wegmans folks, but also with other clients over the years, is they'd go through this like retreat process and they'd come up with their inner compass and they'd say, I want to share this with my team, but I can't, afford to send them all to this full program. Or, hey, I want to share this. I'd really love to do this with my spouse or with my kids, and again, don't have the time to be able to do that. And so we actually created some online courses. And so there's an online inner compass course of what's been done hundreds of times with leaders, but now is able to do at a self-paced online course type of a format. And so there's other options now where we can create, again, the similar kinds of experiences. I'm personally a big believer in getting people together and retreats and all those sorts of things, but especially during the last year and a half, that hasn't been possible. And for some, it's just never going to be possible, or it's not cost effective. And so creating other opportunities for people to go through that together, create a learning community. And that's been a fun kind of new venture as well.
Wow. So I grabbed my notepad and then I realized, let's be present. We can always rewind and take notes. Anyone listening, I encourage you to rewind and take notes. There's a lot that I connected with there. I could probably ask you 30 questions just on that rant right there, Andrew. But I really connected from the start with implementation. I know personally, it's funny. I'm taking this marketing step by step course because I'm trying to relearn some of the stuff that I maybe neglect because I've been doing it long enough that I don't want to forget what I've learned. But since we're on the starting modules, I find myself watching it. Then I put my notepad down. I eat lunch. I eat lunch while watching it. I got a couple emails. Then I'm listening to it while I answer emails. Then the end of the 30-minute segment, it asks me to, take some notes, answer some questions. And I was like, I really got to sit here and write on a notepad right now. I already know this stuff. And there's this thing where you're just consuming information, but you're not implementing it. And I realized the struggle of myself that, okay, so I'm just literally casually consuming this, thinking I know it all. And it gets to the rubber meets the road when they ask you to do a short reflection and I'm too lazy to do it. So it's like, oh, I've got a flaw here. I need to learn how to implement. And another thing I connected with is you were mentioning, looking at a target market. Sometimes it's not, I don't know, women 18 to 35 that are upper class that live in this zip code. It's people that you can actually align with on a conscious level, on a person to person level. It's like, I don't care if you have all the money in the world and you I don't care if you're my client and you give me money. If you don't pick up the phone and I can't create a strategy that works for you, it actually hurts me to have you as a client. I want to be connected with people that are on the same mindset as me. And it kind of ties into something so I don't understand what conscious capitalism is. I listened to a couple of your podcasts. I want to talk about the podcast after this, but I think, conscious capitalism probably ties into the podcast a lot. What is conscious capitalism? Is anything I'm saying kind of connecting to the purpose of it, or give us kind of like the 101 on conscious capitalism?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was actually part of kind of what came from that, of saying we don't have maybe the size of company or even the industry. We don't have that demographic target market that we're going for, but instead we wanted to create this this learning community, I guess, around the same sort of ethos of conscious capitalism. And so conscious capitalism started from, there's a book written in 2007 called Firms of Endearment, written by Rochester, and he basically looked at a bunch of companies, and Wegmans was mentioned, which is why we started, why we heard about it. And it mentioned a lot of these companies. Raj actually was a marketing professor, and still is, and was looking at these organizations that didn't seem to spend all that much on marketing and yet had fiercely loyal customers and were doing well and continuing to grow. And Wegmans was on there. Companies like Southwest Airlines, Patagonia, these companies that just have a really loyal following despite not spending all this money on marketing. And so he was looking at, like, what do these companies have in common? What is this all about? And what he keyed in on were four tenets of what came to be known as conscious capitalism. So the first being that they have a higher purpose beyond just making profits. You need profits to survive. You want to keep the lights on. But the purpose of the company can and maybe even should go beyond that. Kind of like you were just talking about, right? Like when you're trying to select what's a good client fit, or when people are trying to pick, is this a company that I want to work for? More and more people, both in their decisions about picking clients or picking an employer, more and more people are being conscious consumers, trying to align the ways that they're spending money with their values. There's a growing movement of impact investors or socially responsible investors that want to invest their money aligned with their values. So having that higher purpose, and again, not just the plaque on the wall, but how are you actually living it? And people pretty quickly can figure out whether or not it's authentic. So this higher purpose beyond profits was one element. The next was a stakeholder orientation. So these companies, rather than just focusing on the stockholders, which is an important constituency, but it needs to be balanced alongside the well-being of employees, of customers, of the community that you're a part of the environment that you find yourself embedded in. Like there's this whole ecosystem of different entities that all need to be healthy in the long run for your company to be healthy. And yes, in the short run, maybe you can, squeeze that client or that supplier and, maybe get a better deal, but maybe you put them out of business or put them in a tough spot. Or how many examples are there now and probably still ongoing of ways where companies make a lot of money, but they're destroying the environment, and they're not, just because the externalities aren't being priced in, right? So how do we look though at this long-term success, recognizing that whole ecosystem needs to be healthy for our business to be healthy? The next element was conscious leadership. So this is all about what we were talking about earlier, right? That the leaders need to grow for the organization to grow. The leaders can't be the old school kind of command and control type of leaders. They're empowering. They care about their people, and their people really can feel that at a visceral level, that my boss really cares about me and my career growth and my personal well-being and all these different elements. And so they're really servant leaders. And then the last element is a conscious culture. So these cultures are values driven. They do really focus on the holistic well-being and growth of their employees. And so when you wrap all these four tenets together, what he found was he was hoping to find, that these companies, despite all these great things that they're doing for the world, they're still able to keep up with their competitors. And what he actually found was he compared them to the S&P 500, and over a 10-year period, they beat the S&P 500. So they beat the, market average by about 7 times. And then he did a follow-up study after the 07-08 recession and found that over a 15-year period, they beat the competition. They beat the market, the S&P 500 by about 12 times. So these companies are more successful. They're more resilient, even in the face of, a financial downturn like that. And these companies, also are doing better things for the environment, for their employees, for all of these different stakeholders. And so we actually found out about conscious capitalism, like I said, from this book. Wow. But then it turned into a whole movement. It became an annual conference. We went to the 3rd annual conference, and at the end of the conference, I call this, we're the unconscious conscious capitalists. And there's probably yourself or your listeners as well might be resonating with, well, that makes sense. I've always kind of wanted to do business in this sort of a way, but maybe I didn't use that same terminology. So you were the unconscious conscious capitalist, right? Like you believed in it, even if you didn't maybe use those terms. And so we were really resonated with it. And at the end of that 3rd annual conference, they said, we want to open it up to having chapters. So we raised our hand. Rochester was the 3rd chapter. There's now more than 50 around the world, and it's growing actually internationally even faster than it is nationally here. And there's so many organizations that we just wanted to bring together. We said, there's maybe organizations here in Rochester that resonate with this message. Maybe they're not famous enough or big enough like a Wegmans to get noticed in the book, but that are doing great things. And so how do we bring all of them together, help share some of their stories, both to inspire more organizations to move in that direction, but also to create a learning community so that they can all continue to elevate each other's game. So that's kind of how conscious capitalism fits in. That's how the podcast fits in, just like being able to interview some of these leaders and say, what do you do when you have these tough decisions to make, maybe between short-term profits and kind of that longer-term vision that you're aiming for? What kinds of trade-offs have you had to make? What kinds of things do you do personally for your own growth and development? And so kind of sharing some of those stories has become really important as well.
Wow. So 3 but kind of bite-sized questions. So who was the author? What was the name of the book that we're talking about?
Raj Sisodia. And you can look up the book. It's called Firms of Endearment. He actually has since written many other books. One is actually called Conscious Capitalism, which he met John Mackey, who was the founder and CEO of Whole Foods. Met John Mackey on a plane when he had Firms of Endearment was still in preprint. He had like literally the stacks of it printed out, and they got to a great conversation. And John Mackey ended up being so interested in this that they wrote a follow-up book together called Conscious Capitalism. So that book is a little bit more focused on the whole food story. Firms of Endearment was written prior, but has a whole number of different case studies that he runs through, which is interesting. But both are great books and highly recommended and inspiring stories.
I love this. I love how you're saying like unconsciously conscious capitalist. And the reason I like that term is kind of one thing I've learned in business is, and anything in life, you start off with total incompetence. And you move up from incompetence to conscious incompetence. Then you move up to conscious competence. You know what you're doing. You understand what to do, but you're kind of in your head a little bit. And then eventually, when you do it enough, you move into unconscious competence, where it's like riding a bike. It's second nature to you. It's like a language. You're just a rock star out of, you've put in all these hours. Now you're incredible. You're a rock star. And I love that we almost skipped all the steps. We skipped all the steps straight to unconsciously conscious capitalists without necessarily maybe knowing the education or the leadership or realizing what we're doing. But now we're in a world where we have the Whole Foods, the Wegmans of the world that basically created conscious capitalism with the way they do their business. We can now actually study it. And even if we are incompetent, we can get to that level. So I'm wondering, like, other than reading the books, which obviously we should do, how do I get engaged with the Rochester chapter of Conscious Capitalism? How do I start listening and learning and become unconsciously conscious? Oh my God, I can't say it. Unconsciously conscious capitalistic myself. Like, where should I start? Should I sign up for the Rochester chapter? How does that all work?
Yeah, great question. So Conscious Capitalism, again, is this national international organization, and they do an annual conference. It's usually in the spring. Obviously, didn't happen these last 2 years, but hopefully, I'm sure we'll be resuming soon. But they have that spring conference, and then they also in the fall they have what they call a CEO summit, which is a smaller conference, kind of a for those business leaders who are CEOs and want to again just surround themselves with folks who really believe in this and want to do it. Because sometimes, quite honestly, you can feel like you're swimming against the current if you're trying to be this conscious capitalist in a sea of business leaders who maybe are more purely profit driven and those sorts of things. So being able to surround yourself with those folks, and that's similar to what we try to do at our chapter. So at the chapter level, we have monthly meetings where usually, in normal times, and hopefully again soon, we'll go visit a business maybe that's really well known for their culture, and to hear from some of their business leaders about some of the practices and the ways that they operationalize their purpose and their values, and hear from those business leaders. Sometimes we'll do panel discussions. So, a panel on, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or a panel on how to make your culture more inclusive for working parents. That was one that we did that went really well. We actually also did a panel on organizations that are working on pathways to employment for individuals who have been incarcerated and are trying to return to the workforce. And there's so many different organizations that are working on that, which is really, really energizing and exciting to see. So sometimes it's those kind of case studies inside of organizations. Sometimes it's the panels. Sometimes it's more like small social entrepreneurship type of ventures, things that small businesses are doing, and to hear from them. So we have a mixture of those. And then we also do an annual conference, which last year had to be virtual. We're still trying to figure out whether we're going to be able to pull something off in person this year or not, or to stick with virtual for 2021. But there's all kinds of opportunities. And one of the kind of, I guess, the gift and the curse of COVID and going to online meetings was that we did everything on Zoom. So everything is recorded. You can go on our YouTube channel and you can see several of our past meetings and kind of learn from some of those. And also, of course, you can go to fortheevolutionofbusiness.com and see some of the podcast guests. Usually what I'll do is I'll interview one or two of our speakers at a meeting, beforehand as kind of a promo for that meeting and release it as a podcast. So there's some overlap there. And so there's all these opportunities, but really our mission is to be both students and teachers of the principles of conscious capitalism. So what I really love is we could have somebody that's sitting there on the panel 1 month, and then they'll come back the next month because they want to learn from this other great business leader. And I just think about it for myself as sometimes like this booster shot, because again, there's all of these pressures of, just focus on the bottom line, just focus on the money, or for some larger organizations that might have stockholders or things like that. There's all these kind of focuses on the short term, the quarterly numbers, those sorts of things. And to be able to be in a community of people who do see the long run benefits of conscious capitalism and do see the long run benefits of caring about your employees, investing in your culture, and those sorts of things, to be able to be in that community. As much as I appreciate the tools of Zoom and being able to share some of these stories, I can't wait until we can all get back together in person, because some of the magic is the before and the after the meetings of just these folks meeting together and all of the connections, the conscious connections that get made along the way.
I love this. Reiterate, how do I join the newsletter, go online for the website, and then an extension of that, listen to the podcast as well? What's the best way for me to engage in this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so you can go to consciouscapitalism.org, and they have a ton of resources because they've been doing some virtual programming of their own as well. So that's kind of the mothership, if you will, of the large international organization. And they also have some resources where you can kind of dive in more onto the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. You can also go to consciouscapitalismroc.org. That is our chapter website, where you can find links to many of our past events and things that are upcoming, as well as how to join as a member in those sorts of things. And then if you either from our website, or you can go to YouTube and just search Conscious Capitalism ROC, and you can see again our YouTube channel to be able to watch some of those past events. And finally, for the evolution of business.com is where you'll find any of the podcasts, or you can search on any of your favorite podcast apps as well.
And I love in for the evolution of business.com. You've got the EVOL, that's love backwards, right? I see you got that highlighted. So it's I noticed that right away. I was like, I think I know that word. Then I flipped it. Oh, for the love of business. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
So check that out. I one more just general question on capitalism as a whole, because I don't necessarily agree with everything I'm about to say, but I want to kind of take a skeptic's point of view.
I think I know where we're going, and I love it. Let's do it.
Well, because this is something I actually do agree with. I don't really like all the time. They give you this tip in conversations. All right, come in warm, compliment somebody, then tell them the terrible news, and then come in warm. Oh, it's going to be okay then, buddy. And there's good ways to do it and bad ways, but a shit sandwich still has a big piece of shit in it. So it's like, if you're going to hand me some shit, just give me the shit. Don't put it in a sandwich with a bow and a freaking, I don't know. I don't need a toothpick in my shit sandwich. Now, a lot of people hear conscious capitalism and they're, I don't know, they just have a negative association with capitalism. So they're thinking, oh, this is just capitalism with a bow on it. This is just the mission statement version of capitalism. Is there a difference here? Like, is capitalism as bad as some people think it is? And what is the true difference? This isn't just a shit sandwich with a bow on it, right? It's completely different than some of those negative associations we have with capitalism. I don't know. You tell me.
It's a great question, and I often joke because Raj, who started this whole with his books and everything, started this whole movement. Even though he's a marketing professor, he could have in some ways done better to market the term conscious capitalism, because half the people that I talk to when I mention conscious capitalism, they are more on the capitalism side and they hate the word conscious. They're like, what is this soft crap? I don't know about this. I don't know if I believe in that. And the other half of the people that I talk to, they're coming more from the conscious side, whether that's just the way that they are, or maybe they're more in the nonprofit sector or in the government sector or whatever, but they're more about that care and that societal kind of well-being. And they're like, capitalism, they have like this visceral reaction to the word capitalism, right? And so to many people, they'd say conscious capitalism, well, that's an oxymoron. And I hear that all the time. And what what I say, and what I kind of, the I guess informal mission of our chapter, but also the work that I do, is to go from a place where conscious capitalism sounds to people like an oxymoron to a place where it becomes redundant, right? Where capitalism is seen as, oh, we don't need to say conscious capitalism because that's the way that we do business. And think about, we were talking about all these companies you were mentioning where, places that you've worked, or places of people that you know, where they're selecting employers based on the vision and the values and culture of the organization and the ways that we're spending money. So there's all these downstream impacts. Raj's research backed it up that these companies are more successful in the long run. So the more that you can get the word out about that, and now you can't really, it becomes a little bit of circular logic, right? If you're going to say, well, we want to make more money, so we're going to focus on this conscious capitalism thing and not believe in it, right? In the long run. So the alternate way to go about it, though, is to say, okay, these companies, they attract the best talent. They also engage their employees at a higher level. So their employees are not only willing, but excited to give all of their ideas and their energy and all of those sorts of things. They stick around longer, even if people are trying to poach them on LinkedIn, they're like, no, I love where I am, like the story you were telling, right? And so these companies, they hang on to folks longer. And so they start to see, it starts to become, a little bit at a time, but it starts to be like a snowball where we really want to continue to take this to another level. And rather than like the race to the bottom of how can we have squeeze every last penny out of our employees and our suppliers and those sorts of things, it becomes a race to the top of how can we become as conscious as possible. And Patagonia is a great example of this. They've been a leader in this for so long, and they continue to go above and beyond. Like at first it was, okay, we want to, have organic cotton. And then it's like, now you can go on the website and anything that you buy, they will track and show you the carbon footprint and where it comes from and how the farmers were treated that grew this. And they continue to share more and more. And I think that transparency is important because, we all now have this broadcasting device in our pockets at all times, right? And if we have a bad experience with whether as an employee, we could put something on Glassdoor that, don't listen to what they say on their website. That's not what it's really like. Or as a customer, like saying that you had a bad experience. So that there's all this transparency now. And certainly there's good and bad things that come from that and from social media in general and things. But, there is, you have to live up to what you're saying and what you're claiming to do. And so that's where we're trying to go, because if all of these companies are doing better, what if we in Rochester became a hub of conscious capitalism? Not only would there be more companies doing better things for employees, there'd be, not just creating jobs to create jobs, but creating good jobs and fulfilling jobs and jobs where people feel like they're cared for, but also maybe doing better things for the environment. Also maybe having a more inclusive prosperity in Rochester, because there is some pretty disparate impacts, especially along the lines of race here in Rochester. And the high levels of childhood poverty and things like that. What if we had more businesses that were trying to tackle some of those things? And then additionally, if this is a talent attraction and retention strategy for organizations, it could be a regional talent attraction and retention strategy. It could be a regional economic development strategy. If we could be one of the most conscious, regions here in Rochester, and people would want to live there, would want to work there. So that's a piece of it. And like I said, it's easy to be cynical, but you see some of these messages as well, where there are organizations that are really making an impact. And so that's what we want to, continue to create and continue to share those stories. And I'm an optimist. I'm an idealist sometimes too, but there are some really inspiring examples. And it's not about capitalism to make as much money as possible for the capitalists, but instead it's about that longer term impact, that societal impact, and really just using markets, right? Like using markets to say, there I'm noticing a problem in society. How can we come up with some innovation, some product or service or solution? And that's by no means to say that everything can be a market driven solution, but we can get pretty creative when we unleash that creativity inside of organizations.
I'm with you, man. I want to get creative. I want to be optimistic. It's true that it's easy to be cynical. This is a half-baked thought, but it came to mind, Let's say you're cynical. I mean, you have two options. You can tear the system down entirely if you genuinely disagree with it, and in some cases that might be necessary. You can tear the system down entirely, or you can figure out a way to work in the system. And we live in a capitalist country, so we have two options. We either completely tear it down, you can make the decision if you want to, or we figure out a way to have capitalism serve us. Like, I'm not going to tell people what to think. I have an inclination of what you think, but ultimately, if someone might want to tear capitalism down entirely. But if you accept, and if you're not going to just sit around and complain and be cynical, if you accept that capitalism is our reality, the question I ask is what I can do to make it a more enjoyable, more community-driven, more just uplifting reality for everyone. And it sounds like that's exactly the question that conscious capitalism is trying to answer, right?
It's a capitalism and markets and the innovation that comes from that is a very powerful tool. The rise of capitalism has been correlated with the lower levels of poverty has just plummeted over the last couple centuries. GDPs continue to rise, and I won't go into how GDP is a very, very imperfect measure of success, but nonetheless, those gains have not been distributed equitably or fairly, or in a way that really takes care of everyone. But at the same time, you can use any tool for good or ill, right? Like fire it can keep us warm, it can cook our food, and if it gets out of control, it can also destroy a whole lot. And so how do we put the right guardrails and the right kind of safety metrics, I guess, around there? How do we make sure that the benefits are broadly shared without letting the fire rage and destroy things, if that makes sense?
On fire, I know I got to let you go in a minute, so let's go rapid fire. Short answer question just to get to know Andrew a little bit better. And I often start with coffee or tea.
Tea, 100%, green tea.
All right, beer, wine, or you can fill in the blank.
I'd go with wine.
Social media platform, or is there any platform you're most active on? If I wanted to follow you, connect, things like that.
I'm pretty active on kind of the main ones. Twitter, I really enjoy. For this audience, I'd probably say LinkedIn is where you can find me and where you can really follow along with the work that I'm doing and hopefully interact as well.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. We'll do one more. Favorite podcast or book other than the ones we've mentioned today?
There is a great podcast called Pitchfork Economics, which I absolutely love. It is by a guy named Nick Hanauer, who says that the pitchforks he's actually like a multimillionaire, but he spends a lot of his money on more of these, what kinds of policy changes do we need to have a more conscious capitalism? And like he was one of the main proponents putting money behind the Fight for 15 in Seattle, things that I guess aren't necessarily aligned with what many of his fellow multimillionaires would be doing. And, he says, if we don't kind of make a more conscious capitalism, then the pitchforks are coming for the people like me. And so he's one of those reformers and also just kind of irreverent in some ways. And maybe those that are listening now, if they like that style, would enjoy the podcast.
I love that. Okay, a couple more just so as reminders. So Your website, you've got courses, emotional intelligence, things like that. Do the courses cost money? How do I take them? What should I do if I want to learn more about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so you can find the links through the accelerateteam.com. You can also just go directly to Accelerate You. So how do we accelerate you as a leader, right? AccelerateYOU.com and find that Inner Compass course. We have, there is a cost to them, but if you are listening right now and for whatever reason, COVID or something else, or you're unemployed and, trying to find what your next step is, you can reach out to me directly and happy to extend a scholarship, because it's really about making that impact for folks and making more conscious leaders.
I'm happy to hear that. I don't need the scholarship. I'm going to buy the course, but if anyone does, there's the course, there's the website, there's a podcast. Let's just shout out again, the best way to keep in touch. Maybe if we just want to get our feet wet before we take the course.
Yeah, so you can get in touch, go to the accelerateteam.com, learn a little bit more about us. You can also find all of my contact information on there if you'd like to reach out directly. You can listen to my voice, but I try to sit back as much as possible and let the guests shine on fortheevolutionofbusiness.com, or search For the Evolution of Business podcast. Or if you're more interested in the conscious capitalism thing, consciouscapitalism.org or consciouscapitalismroc.org for our chapter website. I really hope that some people are listening and might be interested or engaged, and hopefully want to learn a little bit more, want to evolve themselves and evolve their own companies, and hopefully we'll be in person sometime soon too, so I can meet some 3D listeners and see some of you at future Conscious Capitalism meetings.
I'm with you, man. I want to meet you in person. I appreciate we milked every minute of our time. I know we both got to run off, but every minute's been valuable. I hope people re-listen, and I hope I have you back. I appreciate it again, Andrew.
Really appreciate the conversation and everything that you're doing for Rochester. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Rochester Business Connections. Don't forget to share this, rate, and comment on your favorite platform. You can also email me, ben@valbertmarketing.com. Let's connect soon. Until then, keep thriving, everyone.